Good morning, everybody. Get rid of my hat and get down to business here. Thanks for joining us here on another installment of Friday Reflections at San Diego Oasis. Thanks for finding us here on Zoom through your device from your stay-at-home safety as we are all in ours. And doing what we can to find the sweetness of life under these trying conditions. We've been thinking a lot these last 7 Fridays, haven't we, about letting go, about doing without, about grief, about change, about impermanence, about all kinds of great and rich and I think ultimately therapeutic philosophical ideas. You know, I think of philosophy often that way as a healing modality. I'm not as interested in all the intellectual gymnastics that sometimes go on in philosophy departments. I'm more drawn to and attracted to and fed by the idea of philosophy as therapy, of philosophy simply being another example of our human search for wisdom and understanding, which is another way of saying wholeness and wellness. So Friday Reflections is just about all that kind of stuff. It's me for 30 minutes or so from 10 to 10:30. And I'm kind of talking to those of you who are joining us maybe for the first time. The rest of you know exactly what goes on here. So thanks for tuning in early to hear me play my guitar. It's just a fun idea that Simona had about, hey, why don't you play some music as just kind of like hold music for everybody as they're logging on in those 10 minutes or so before 10 o'clock. So thanks for checking in early to do that. If you missed it, check in early next Friday and you can experience that with us. So if I haven't met you before, my name is Peter Bolland. I'm a philosophy and humanities professor by trade and the department chair down at Southwestern College. I'm teaching remotely at Southwestern like everybody else. I just heard yesterday that San Diego State University is announcing that it is going online for fall. And I think a lot of colleges are, not all. So we're all sort of making these decisions literally day by day. And at the end of our half hour today, we're going to put up some polling questions around that general theme about what should we do here at Oasis? How soon do you want to see us face to face again? Or are you kind of making peace and even thriving in this new this new online format and trying to make the best of it? If you haven't already registered at San Diego Oasis and joined, I really want to take just a quick second here to encourage you to do that. I know we've published the Zoom meeting log on publicly here so that, and I've spread it all over the place, so a lot of you are finding this webinar who are not members of San Diego Oasis. I want to tell you something. That door's gonna close. That door is gonna close at the end of May. Starting in June, we're gonna continue these Friday Reflections, but to get in, you're going to have to be registered as a member, and only then will they email you the login. It's going to go secret. We're going underground, so we're not going to, blather our Zoom links all over social media anymore. Starting the first Friday in June, but for now, it's a free for all. We just want to give it away and get as many folks in here who want to be here, so we can do this work together. Thank you for thinking through all of that with me. So last week I mentioned that today's theme is death. Yeah, I know. Who wants to think about that? Who wants to talk about that? Well, you know what? In philosophy, we think about it and we talk about it a lot, and there's some very good reasons for that. It's not because we're morbid and creepy and we like to think about awful, terrible things. It's because there's something liberating about facing death, and there's something debilitating about denying death. So in my opinion, if you're seeking wisdom, you're all about freedom, you're all about empowerment, you're all about liberation, especially from fear. So let's think today a little bit around that idea of death. and how it connects to our lives. I mean, we're living literally through a pandemic, and there are many, many of our loved ones who have faced terrible losses in these times. You know, the United States makes up about 4.6% of the population of the planet, less than 5%. And yet 28% of global COVID-19 deaths, 28% are here in the United States. We have a problem. And I know this gathering is not about health policy or politics or any of that stuff. Maybe we'll get to that down the road. But thinking through this from a philosophical perspective, it is no doubt that all of us are thinking a little bit more about death these days. Going to the grocery store, going to the dentist, the face masks, the hand sanitizers. We are trying to defend ourselves against perhaps our own mortality, or I think from a more empathetic, compassionate perspective, against the unnecessary deaths of others as a potential carrier. So of course we're thinking about death, but it's sort of taboo to talk about it, right? So let me take you back to when I first started as a philosophy student. One of the first guys you learn about in philosophy class is Socrates, right? This irascible, kind of crazy teacher in 5th century Athens who was the teacher of Plato. And Plato spent his philosophical career writing about his dead teacher, Socrates, who didn't write a word, who never left us anything. So the only reason we know about Socrates really is because Plato wrote a ton of stuff about him. And Socrates, of course, as many of you know, was executed by the Athenian court. And after he was tried and convicted and sentenced to death, he was awaiting execution in prison. And his friend Crito came to see him. Now, Crito fancied himself to be, kind of an important fellow, a man about town, a man about Athens, and he was well connected and he had wealth and power. And he came to Socrates, his friend, and he said, "Hey, I know you're on death row. I know you're scheduled for execution. I tell you what, I've got the jailer bribed. I've got the warden bribed. I've got a yacht waiting down in the harbor. Your family is waiting for you on this island over here. Let's go. The prison gates have swung open. You can escape easily." And Socrates, and this is an infamous story in philosophy, Socrates refused to escape for two reasons, I think. What he tells Crito is, look, if I run away, it's a confession of my guilt, and I am innocent. And his second reason was, as a devoted Athenian citizen and as a decorated war hero, I owe a loyalty to Athens. And if they, in their quote unquote infinite wisdom, have decided to sentence me to death, it would be irrational for me to run away. Why should we just obey laws that benefit us, but disobey laws that harm us or do not benefit us? And that's the tack that he takes. And so I think there are even deeper reasons why Socrates did not escape, and that gets us to our topic today, death. As his friends gathered around in his chamber, in his prison cell, and he was about to drink the hemlock poison that would kill him, this famous scene, his friends are all crying and they're all weeping, and he's in the strange position of comforting them. Have you ever been with a loved one in hospice where that precise scene was repeated, where the one who is dying has reached what Elizabeth Kubler-Ross articulated as that final stage, acceptance? And it is the loved ones who are still at the earlier stages, denial, fighting with the doctors for alternative treatments, and depression, and all those other stages. And our loved one who is about to die is modeling for us renunciation and allowance. Well, that's the scene here. And so Socrates is trying to calm his friends down. And he essentially asks his friends, why are you so upset? First of all, we don't know what death is. We don't know what happens after death. And secondly, and this is the line I wanted to focus on, Socrates famously said, the philosopher rehearses his own death. Now, that's a curious way of saying it. First of all, the word philosopher in that sentence means simply the lover of wisdom. So we're all philosophers. Let's get that straight. And secondly, rehearses his own death. It's a curious English translation of the ancient Greek, of course. And let's look at it a little bit. The word rehearse comes from the archaic French word rehercier, and I don't speak contemporary French or archaic French. It's spelled R-E-H-E-R-C-I-E-R, rehercier. And that's where our English word rehearse comes from. And it originally meant in Old French to go over again, to repeat. And that tends to be what we mean by rehearse, right? To like an actor rehearsing her lines for a play. But it also, even when you dig even deeper into archaic French, it literally means to rake over, to turn over, like to turn over the soil. So it's originally an agricultural image, this idea of preparing the soil for the crops that are going to keep you and the rest of us alive. So rehearsing your death now in this sense means not morbidly sitting around thinking about how you're going to die. That's not what we're talking about. In Socrates' sense, rehearsing your death simply means being with it, facing it again and again, working with it the way you would work with the soil, prepare it the way you would prepare the soil, learn it, and turn it into a productive field of insight. Saying yes to my own mortality, my own inevitable death, frees me. So for Socrates, rehearsing our death means practicing deep acceptance of the transitory nature of all things. To every day let go of everything you love. That's a famous Buddhist meditation, to imagine everything you love being gone, everyone you love being dead, your house burned to the ground, all your precious clothes gone. To be with impermanence, to be with the transitory nature of all things. You know, there's my dog Cooper playing back there. Our animals teach us this beautifully, don't they? They live in a world of constant transformation and death. Hiking yesterday, walking a little bit around the neighborhood with Lori, we saw a gopher snake crossing the trail. And, you know, you always think, rattlesnake, I'm going to die. But, of course, then it's just a gopher snake. And on he goes. But he did curl up and coil and kind of hiss at us. And I thought, wow, there's a little death machine right there. That animal is a long, sinuous muscle. It's essentially a living piece of rope designed to strangle to death and consume whole little animals like voles, which, by the way, I rescued a vole from my pool yesterday. I went out in the backyard and there was a guy swimming around my pool, a little vole. They look like rats, but they're way cuter. They have kind of squished up faces, very short tails. And he was swimming really well. I think he could have gone a while, but I got the scooper and tossed him out into the open space behind our house. And then I look up in the trees and I see a murder of crows moving through the grove of eucalyptus. Aptly named, right? A murder of crows. When here it is springtime, the birds are all having babies. And you know what that means. That means the crows find the nests and they eat eggs and they eat baby birds. It's a bloodbath out there, and I'm not happy about it, but I have to say yes to it. I had a chicken sandwich yesterday for lunch. You know, I'm not immune to this process. One day my own body will break down and become part of other elemental forms. That's what we say yes to when we rehearse our own deaths. This is far from morbidity. This isn't macabre. This is life affirming and liberating in a really profound way. So for Socrates, We are, and these are practically cliches now, aren't they? We are to live every day as if it is our last. And I know you've heard those words and you've thought about those words, but how many of us get up in the morning and do that? Nobody. We don't do that. We are forced to do that when we get terminal diagnoses. We are forced to do that when we face our own imminent death. What if we got ready for that a little sooner? That's what I'm thinking about with you today. That's what I take away from Socrates' 25 century old admonition that we too, if we love wisdom, are to rehearse our own deaths. You know, if you don't do that, let's flip it and talk about what happens if you don't do that. By not rehearsing our death, we live in an illusion. We fall prey to all manner of distortions. We slip into the illusion that we are permanent, that we are an isolated identity cut off from everything else. We fall into the illusion that our current belief system is true, pitting us against all kinds of other people with different perspectives. And this is no way to live. It's the opposite of being free. I want to touch on another tradition, and I'm thinking of Carlos Castaneda. Many of you are already registered for my The Four Agreements webinar coming up this coming Tuesday, May 19th. If you're not, consider joining us. We're doing a 90-minute webinar right here on Oasis, a different Zoom link. So you'll have to register for that one. It's called The Four Agreements. It's this coming Tuesday from 10 to 11:30. And there we're going to dive into a wonderful batch of Native American philosophy and wisdom from the Toltec tradition. But today I'm thinking about a different guy, Carlos Castaneda, and his Yaqui shaman mentor who trained him in the Yaqui way of knowledge. And in Carlos Castaneda's wonderful work, we get the teachings of Don Juan. And Don Juan worked very hard with Carlos Castaneda to convince him that death is a prominent friend. And it was very oddly specific in those teachings that death is always just over our left shoulder. And he's always there. And knowing he is always there like a good friend, we acclimate to his proximity. We get used to it. We get used to him always being around. And so he becomes less and less frightening. And in Castaneda's apprenticeship with Don Juan, the teaching was that his nearness, death's nearness, frees us from our pettiness. It frees us from the pettiness of our life. We just don't have time for the nonsense anymore. And we get better and better at letting things go. With death as our constant companion, our priorities shift, our values clarify, and our courage tempers into steel. Everybody with me now on this webinar who has had a brush with death, maybe a terminal diagnosis or an accident, can testify to the power of those truths. When we make friends with death, we quickly drop our perceived slights. Since there's no more ego to defend, we're so much quicker at forgiveness when we make friends with death. We know we don't have forever. And we move instead into the consciousness of forgiveness and gratitude. Every moment becomes a shining, singular miracle, a gift of infinite grace. Who doesn't want to see their life that way? You know, in the words of the Jewish mystic Abraham Joshua Heschel, he says, the world becomes bereft of triteness. The world becomes bereft of triteness. Banality transforms into significance, and boredom becomes impossible. You know, that wonderful line from that great John Donne poem, that classic, "No man is an island," that, you know, do not ask for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. It tolls for you. The death bell rings for you. Every man's death is my death. Every woman's death is my death. We are united in this single transformational process that is coming our way. And if you are unwilling to make friends with your death that is right over your left shoulder, then which is to say you're unwilling to make friends with fluidity and impermanence, then you close yourself off from his gifts, from death's gifts. You sentence yourself to a life of illusory self-importance, confusion, suffering, disappointment, fear, and then shock when our last days actually come upon us, when our last hours finally arrive. When you refuse to make friends with death, the fullness of the beauty of the world eludes you. The grandeur of human creativity evades your grasp. You don't feel things as deeply as you should. You sort of skitter along the surface of life instead of drinking deeply from its depths. When you refuse to make friends with death, you miss out on the delirious depth of love. It remains only a rumor, a fantasy that you see in love stories, and not something that you taste for yourself. It's not a lived experience. So becoming friends with death unlocks all the gifts, unlocks all the beauty of the world. I have the blessing and the gift of having the opportunity often to work with returning combat veterans coming back from Afghanistan, mostly these days, right? And I sit in my office when I used to have real office hours with some of these soldiers, some of these Marines, some of these sailors, about life on the ground in combat and the camaraderie they had with their fellow soldiers, and how immediate life becomes when the bullets are flying and when there are people dying around you. I know it sounds so strange to people like me for whom that is just an alien reality, but when I hear them talk about those times, I tell you, there's a wistfulness in their voice. There was something about that immediacy, about all the superficiality and triviality of life just being ripped away by the intense urgency of that. When death gets that close, you are that much more alive. And many veterans have confessed to me, one of the challenges about coming back home to so-called ordinary life is that A, none of the people around them have experienced that, and B, there's something sort of soft and vanilla about this that you have to work a little harder to get down to the sweet stuff. Now, I've got some Marcus Aurelius passages because speaking of combat veterans, Marcus Aurelius was a Roman general and an emperor, and these last few weeks I've been sharing bits of his, and around the subject of death I just have to go back to him. So the great Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius put it this way in his little journal that he kept. He said, "Look at how soon we're all forgotten, the abyss of endless time that swallows it all, the emptiness of all those applauding hands, the people who praise us, how capricious they are, how arbitrary, and the tiny region in which it all takes place. The whole earth is a point in space, and most of it uninhabited." Marcus Aurelius is really a deep thinker, and think about it. He's like the emperor. He's like the president of the United States, right? Lots of applause and lots of praise and honor, and he's like, it doesn't mean anything. And all the people who are plotting, they're all going to be dead soon. I'm going to be dead soon. We're all going to melt away. Now, again, this might not be your cup of tea. He's talking tough about this. This ain't no Hallmark movie, right? He goes right to the grittiness of this. He says, here's his grittiest line. I hope you don't mind the vividness of this one. "Human lives are brief and trivial. Yesterday a blob of semen, tomorrow embalming fluid and ash." Yeah, I am laughing. That's pretty great. He says, "To pass through this brief life as nature demands, to give it up without complaint. like an olive that ripens and falls, praising its mother, thanking the tree it grew on. Wow, what a nice analogy. To be like that olive, to ripen in the sun, to feel the breeze, and then when it's your time, drop with nothing but gratitude on your lips for the tree that birthed you. He says, don't worry about how long you'll go on doing this. A single afternoon would be enough. He says this about a big celebrity of his day, right? The old Hellenistic or Greek, the Macedonian king that conquered and united the Greek Empire, Alexander the Great, right? He's like their Abraham Lincoln. They look back on him with great respect. He said, Alexander the Great and his mule driver both died, and the same thing happened to both. They were absorbed alike into the life force of the world, or dissolved alike like atoms. And this is coming for all of us. He says, don't look down on death, but welcome it. It too is one of the things required by nature, just like youth and old age, like growth and maturity, like a new set of teeth, like a beard, like the first gray hair, like sex and pregnancy and childbirth, like all the other physical changes at each stage of life. Our dissolution is no different. So this is how a thoughtful person should await death, Marcus Aurelius writes. Not with indifference, not with impatience, not with disdain, but simply viewing it as one of the things that can happen to us. How you anticipate the child's emergence from its mother's womb, that's how you should await the hour when your soul will emerge from its compartment. He goes on one last bit here. He says, none of us have much time. And yet you act as if things were eternal. The way you fear and long for them. Before long, darkness. And whoever buries you mourned in their turn. Wow. I tell you what, this Marcus Aurelius chap, he really gets it. He really feels it. And as I often do, I want to leave you with one last piece, and it's a poem, again, a Mary Oliver poem like last week, because she's really good on this question too. She spent a lot of time in nature. And so you can look this, just Google this afterwards if you want to read this. The poem is by Mary Oliver, and it's called When Death Comes. When death comes like the hungry bear in autumn, when death comes and takes all the bright coins from his purse to buy me and snaps his purse shut, when death comes like the measles pox, when death comes like an iceberg between the shoulder blades, I want to step through the door full of curiosity, wondering, what is it going to be like, this cottage of darkness? And therefore I look upon everything as a brotherhood and a sisterhood. And I look upon time as no more than an idea. And I consider eternity as another possibility. And I think of each life as a flower, as common as a field daisy, and as singular. And each name a comfortable music in the mouth, tending, as all music does, towards silence. And each body a lion of courage and something precious to the earth. When it's over, I want to say, all my life I was a bride married to amazement. I was the bridegroom taking the world into my arms. When it's over, I don't want to wonder if I have made of my life something particular and real. I don't want to find myself sighing and frightened or full of argument. I don't want to end up simply having visited this world. Mary Oliver, When Death Comes. Next week's topic is going to focus on the question of tyranny, because I hear a lot these days about the topic of tyranny, that the stay-at-home order is tyranny, that making us wear a mask at Costco is tyranny. I want to think more about that with you. It's time we tackle that. It's not going to be a political talk. We're going to think philosophically about ethics and our moral obligation to one another, and what tyranny really is. But right now, Simona, why don't we put up that poll? We're going to ask you all a couple poll questions. Please help us out by responding, touching your screen or using your mouse. Answer these questions for us. It is really going to help us plan our program. I'll play guitar for about a minute or so while you're working on that. And then I'll come back with a little closing comment. I'm not sure how long to go with that music because I don't know who's finished it all and who's done. Let me click through and look at some of these questions myself. Ah, nice. Okay. So, as some of you are finishing up the poll and communicating with us at Oasis, we really appreciate that. If you answered the poll already, we are graciously grateful for your responses. We really work hard to build programs that are completely responsive to what you want. I mean, why wouldn't we, right? So your feedback really helps. That's how we came up with the 4 agreements topic next Tuesday. So I want to plug that one more time, and we're done here. Please, while you're on the Google machine, search San Diego Oasis. Become a member if you're not. And then when you are, and for all the folks who are members, register for the 4 Agreements webinar. I'd love to see you there. It'd be fantastic to have all of you join us. I know that many of you already have. So again, next week's topic here on Friday Reflections. We still have a few more free ones to go in May. And next week's topic is going to be about tyranny and real tyranny. I received something in the mail yesterday through Facebook that kind of blew my mind that I want to share with you. It's about my grandfather and his time during the Nazi occupation in Holland. And I learned some things yesterday that kind of rocked me to my core. And I want to share that with you next week around this question. So there is no end to the gratitude that we all have here at Oasis for your participation. Thank you to the many, many, many of you who joined us this morning. I am so thrilled, and I'm always excited about our connections here. So I will post some of these writings, these Stoicism writings, and I'll post the Mary Oliver poem on my Facebook page a little bit later today. And just go and have a peaceful, conscious, immediate, fearless Friday. And I'll see you all on Tuesday if you're joining me for that. If not, I'll see you next Friday for our next Friday reflection. And here are the poll results. So let's look at those for a minute or so. Okay, yeah, that first question is about when should we physically return? And look at that number. So 3/4 of you are not ready to come back. I'm with you. I think it's wise for us just to continue this for now, but we want to keep checking your pulse on that. And the second question really has to do with not the philosophy and lecture type stuff like this, but all the great physical and dance and Tai Chi and yoga and all the other wonderful work like that Oasis does. Maybe we could meet outside. So let's see what folks said about that. Okay, I would sign up to do Tai Chi in a park. Yeah, so would I. That sounds awesome. Are we allowed to go to parks? Yeah, I think we are. Lake Murray is opening today, in fact. So we're in that early opening back up phase. So maybe some Tai Chi in the park is just what the Tai Chi master ordered. And 40% of you said you would bring a chair for a plein air class. That's a fancy French word, isn't it, for outside? That's a great way to paint. That's how Monet did it. So great. Thank you for your participation on that. And thank you again for joining us. And I'll stop saying thank you now. See you next week, my friends. Namaste.